fifth in the series of revisiting classics with translation artists. It is, in fact, a pleasure to see people referring to all the information that we are spreading through the past 4 series that we have put up on YouTube, and which has been reaching students and people who are wanting to translate, have more light into the subject of translation. Without taking much of your time, I have just 2 important announcements to make. The first is that in the series of translations, we will be exploring the intermediate translations in between mediums, like dance, poetry, architecture, and paintings in the next few sessions that would happen, which might bring about some change from the subject of languages. The second is that we have started a women's collective magazine, a magazine which would be by the effort of Dr. Anamika and Rimli Bhattacharya, working on collecting all the sibling art forms and the achievements of women in the field of arts and other associated things. I would call Rashmi here to speak a few words about it. Rashmi, please come here.
शुक्रिया आनंद जी. ये डॉक्टर अनामिका का एक ब्रेन चाइल्ड है, आप इसे कह सकते हैं, एंड इट विल बी अ काइंड ऑफ अ बायलिंगुअल ऑनलाइन मैगज़ीन. अभी तो ये एक बायलिंगुअल ऑनलाइन मैगज़ीन होगी, बाद में इसे हम प्रिंट में लाने का भी सोच रहे हैं. एंड जैसा कि इन्होंने कहा कि different art forms, all the contemporary art forms, fine arts, music, painting, drama और साहित्य, जिसमें से हिंदी साहित्य और अंग्रेजी साहित्य. मैं खुद हिंदी में लिखती हूँ, तो जितने भी ये कला और साहित्य के फॉर्म्स हैं, इन सबको साथ में जोड़कर एक पत्रिका का हमने सपना देखा है. एक साझा सपना, अलाव एक साझा सपना. तो हम सब स्त्रियां हैं और हमारी भाषा अलग हो सकती है, पर हमारा शरीर एक जैसा ही है. हमारे दुख और हमारे हंसने की जो भाषा है वो एक ही है, और सृजन ये कहीं ना कहीं हमें जोड़ता है. तो इस सृजन के बहाने एक कोशिश है कि हम सब एक साथ सपने देख सकें, उन सपनों में रंग भर सकें और एक दूसरे को प्रोत्साहित कर सकें, मोटिवेट कर सकें, ताकि जो भी हमारी कला है उसमें और निखार आए. तो आप सबसे गुजारिश है कि आप उसमें अपनी एंट्रीज़ भेजें, और ये जो इन्फॉर्मेशन है यहाँ पर शेयर हो जाएगी, ईमेल एड्रेस. तो आपकी सबकी एक मतलब जब ये साझा सपना है तो आप सबके साथ आने की ज़रूरत है. और मेरे साथ इसमें कल्याणी राजन रहेंगी. कल्याणी प्लीज़ कम टू द स्टेज. हमारे साथ यहाँ पंखुरी भी हैं, पंखुरी सिन्हा, आप भी स्टेज पे आ जाएं प्लीज़. हम सबको मिलकर इस सपने को रंग भरना है. थैंक यू.
Kalyani, I request you to please come up to the stage and please share some introductions of the guests. Thank you.
It is an honor for me to introduce to you today's panelists. We have Dr. Anamika with us, who will be speaking to Professor Rimli Bhattacharya. So Dr. Anamika, of course, needs no introduction. This is the 5th series of the translation artists talks that we've been conducting, and very enriching series, a novel conceptualization, which is her brainchild, and it's been going on. I'll proceed to introduce Professor Rimli Bhattacharya, who works as Associate Professor at the Department of English, Faculty of Arts, University of Delhi. Her areas of interest include comparative literature, narrative theory, performance history, film and visual arts, primary education and children's literature, and translation. Rimli Bhattacharya has trained in comparative literature and works on a range of genres and forms in a number of languages, Indian and others. She writes on art and artists, performance history and actresses and film. She was script consultant and production coordinator for the film based on Tagore's last and most philosophical novel, Char Adhyay. directed by Kumar Shahani in 1997. She has, and the list actually goes on, so I'll just be very brief. She has taught at JNU, MS University of Baroda, has been a distinguished Indian scholar at the Center for South Asian Studies, University of Hawaii. Since 2001, she has been teaching at the Department of English, University of Delhi. Her ongoing involvement with the classroom experience informs her MPhil seminar course on children's literature, childhood, pedagogy, and literary forms. I welcome you, Professor Bhattacharya. Please put your hands together to welcome ma'am. We have Dr. Minoti Chatterjee with us. Ma'am retired from the University of Delhi as principal of the prestigious Kamala Nehru College, where she served for a decade. In her 10 years, she helped Kamala Nehru College evolve into one of the top arts colleges in India. The college grew culturally and academically under her guidance. A patron of theatre and folk art, the Golden Jubilee celebration of the college under her aegis was a phenomenal success. Previously, she worked in the Department of Political Science, Gargi College, University of Delhi. She has researched extensively on political ideology in relation to pre-partition Bengali theatre. One of her extremely well-known books is titled Theatre Beyond the Threshold: Colonialism, Nationalism, and the Bengali Stage, 1905 to 1947. Please put your hands together for Dr. Minoti Chatterjee. Professor Brinda Bose works as Associate Professor at the Center for English Studies, School of Language, Literature and Culture Studies, JNU. She has almost 2 decades of teaching experience, previously having worked at the Faculty of Arts, University of Delhi and Hindu College, University of Delhi. She's been a visiting fellow, Institute of Humanities and Global Cultures, University of Virginia, 2012. Fellow at Nehru Memorial Museum and Library 2006 to 2009, Resident Fellow Rockefeller Center for Study and Research Bellagio, Italy 2004, and Leverhulme Research Interchange Fellow UK 2001. Ma'am has several publications. She's been, for those of us who studied at DU, we know her as the editor of the Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway Worldview edition. Thank you so much for being with us, ma'am. Please welcome Professor Brinda Bose. I would call Anand to take over the proceedings.
A new book which Dr. Rimli Bhattacharya had written. We would start with the book launch.
I would just begin elementarily with, let me confess that when I started my research, I had no access to the Bangla language. I'm not proud of it. I'm a Bengali. I learnt it much later in my life. But of course, I also had very little knowledge of Bengal's cultural history. Since this dialogue is about translation, at one point of time, I'm sure we'll talk about it when we round up the session, I read Rimli Bhattacharya's translation of Amar Kotha and Amar Obhinitri Jibon to partly understand the history of theatre and also, of course, to read the story of this phenomenal pioneering actress, Noti Binodini. So much of my understanding was based on her understanding of what she translated from Noti Binodini. Till then, I had only known them as creatures of the subworld, heard stories, and it was only this translation that led me to re-examine many things within translation, nomenclatures, names, stories, lots of things which I re-looked at. So I think what she's really foregrounded, and we can start with this, is to bring in the complexities which a normal translation doesn't have. I've never read, and this is not for any other than my own feeling, I've never read such a thorough and such a good foreword and afterward. If any of you have read this book, I think it has done it all. So I'm extremely grateful for having gone through this work. So I think we can begin with one aspect of childhood and the river. If you would like to just take it on from there.
Thank you, everyone, all of you who've come. It's not a lecture, as you know. It's really, in some ways, without being nostalgic or forecasting, but I thought of the river because, for many reasons. I was a very lonely child, but I found a great deal of replenishment, of course, in books, like a lot of lonely children, and the wonderful nature in Assam, where I grew up, and a huge amount of people from all over the country. So Assam was Assam, but our home was really the subcontinent. We had people of all kinds, food and languages. And the best of all, just about 5 minutes away from our home, was Brahmaputra. So I was often disappearing there, and because it was such a busy house, no one noticed. So this flowing world of the river, and it's those of you who've seen or been on the Brahmaputra, you'll know it's, again, a very unique kind of river. You would know Bidut, and others might. But it turned very fierce every year because of the floods, the annual floods. And Indira Gandhi would come during my time, and it was like a ritual. She would come and do her survey. But when it was not in flood, once a tiger came floating on the floods, the sheet of the river was like a scroll in constant flux. And I would like to believe, so maybe this is my romanticizing of sometimes a difficult childhood, that something of those people, languages, and the constant proximity of the river and the water had something to do with the way I love sounds of all kinds, and love leaping into different languages and moving from one to the other. Now, you might ask, it happened in Taiwan, and for the first time in my life, I was cut off from all the languages that I knew, excepting for English, and I've called it language sickness. I love Chinese, but I also wanted some other language. And I would actually sing in a very Besura voice, Hindi and some Bangla. And it actually, in some strange way, the river took a bend and a twist, and I just dived into Bangla. So that's where it came. And I want to read out two passages from these two texts of Vinodini. I'll only read out from the first text, just a bit. The first is, she's talking about her childhood, and it's very dramatic, it's very tragic. She loses her brother. The brother is being treated in a free hospital, so they don't release the body, but the mother runs away with the body and goes to the ghat. So I call this session the poetic in the everyday. So the everyday of the metropolitan child in 19th century Bengal, mid-19th century, was actually not just the city, it was the river. There were the ghats. So that aspect of a kind of semi-rural Bengal, but also the river which is bringing shipping, which is, of course, the vein of colonialism. And for me, that's how I began to imagine Vinodini. So I could never, because I was an outsider, to history, to political science, to economic history, to Bengali per se. I've never actually formally horror of horrors, I'm making this confession, never actually studied Bangla. So it gave me a kind of an intermeshing of a very metropolitan urban consciousness of a woman who's actually earning her living in a new form of theatre. It's not any of the traditional ones, but someone who has this very instinctive connection with the Ghat. If you go to North Calcutta, you just go there. So just a very quick bit from here. In the midst of all this, we were narrowly saved from yet another tragedy. While my grandmother and our neighbor had been occupied with the cremation of this brother, who's very young, my mother had gradually waded into the river till she was waist deep in the Ganga. I clung to her sari and screamed loudly. Then the grandmother comes and leads the mother away, but the mother is sort of deranged. And this girl, that is the future actress, Binodini, is both terrified by her mother, haunted by the death of the brother, and completely paralyzed. And at some point, the mother breaks down and starts crying. And then when she tries to stop her mother, the grandmother says, "Let her be. She needs to cry." Terrified, I remained silent, but I too was on the verge of breaking down. So the first bit of it is full of such incidents about her marriage to a boy who she doesn't know where that boy went away, why they were married in the first place, and extremely poverty-stricken. And by the time she's 9, the mother decides that they're starving, and this girl has to, like you would apprentice a boy into some trade. So, you know, get into the theater. It has nothing to do with glamour, glory, nothing, just some money. And they are having these rehearsals, and at that time, a lot of the patrons of theater were sort of upper class Bhadralok who had these houses here, there, one by the river, one somewhere else, Baganbari and all. So when I first joined the theatre, rehearsals used to be held in one of Rasik Niogi's house, that's the guy, by the river Ghat. And actually many of these houses still survive. Recently a film was made on Binodini by Tuhinabo Mojumdar. He actually worked with this text, and he has a lot of shots along the Ghat. So he kind of went back to it in a way. And then she says, "I do not remember the place very well, but some memories have stayed with me." The house and the veranda overlooked the Ganga. And just below us was a Ghat, and on either side were the restrooms for travelers on their final journey, so the copses. This beautiful picture from my childhood, so this blend of work, joy, just fun, and kind of the ephemerality of the water and death, and everything, the flow, has stayed on with me. How the Ganga gurgled past the house. I would run along that long winding veranda, and in my happiness, many were the dreams that sprang forth in my mind. So I'll just stop with this.
Yeah, I think I'd like to just sort of add on to how it developed and then hand it over to Brinda. You see, me being a political scientist, I looked at the personal becoming the political a little too much into the text. But here, as we know, that public theatre was drawn into a project of modernity, along with the changes the city was changing, and a new medium, a metropolitan intelligentsia, colonial rule. So she was going through all these changes along with it brilliantly, I mean, in terms of reconciling with it, especially the rise of capital and what you copiously wrote in the foreword. I'd like to read that to add to the flow. And this is a little scene from the Pukur, you know, which I wanted to quote. Pukur is a small place where pond. Yeah. So women sharing a dip in the same Pukur in the metropolis of Calcutta immersing themselves in rehearsals, which you just talked about in the city's burgeoning public theatre, being mentioned and monitored by educated, rich, disgruntled, wayward, and in parentheses or in brackets, she writes whatever, babus, and mentoring new aspirants in turn. The actresses did much of that. Their loves, lawsuits, contracts, and rivalries, the highs and lows of performance, negotiating literature out of informal education, reading their parts and of knowledge that enters the senses and the sinews, bones and muscles, sensuously immersed knowledge. Writing poetry, some self-published, others in theatre magazines of a later era, daring to publish an autobiography. Oh, so many disparate strands, Rimli. The city really drove into them. Yeah? We can continue with
comment on that playbill, which is from a little later, 1894. Public theatre starts in the 1870s. But you just get a very quick sense of the range that each of these women were tackling. And also the irony and I would say the kind of jouissance, the pleasure of actually forging a new form of entertainment. Okay, popular, okay, tawdry, tinsel stuff, and heavily under attack. That we have to remember. That it's not something that, oh, you're going to a talk at the Habitat. How nice. Would you like some coffee? No. Theater. Oh, I mean, so I actually had a compilation, and then I spilled coffee on my laptop, and so that compilation came to a dead round, yes, which was on just the huge range of anti-theatrical diatribe. So it wasn't just the actresses, it was just about everything. It was like in Bangla you say gallo gallo. It's all over, the deluge, you know. So this idea of something tempestuous taking over tradition, taking over dharma, taking over what is quintessentially Bengali on the one hand, and on the other then actually calling this mixed breed, this hybrid eclectic stuff, saying that this is quintessentially Bengali. That's why I just thought I'll give you a glimpse of this. By the way, I should give credit where credit is due. The first photograph was taken last year by a very talented young woman called Sanchita Bhattacharya. She is a librarian actually at the Center for Studies in Social Sciences, but she's also an excellent photographer, and we went around taking these photos. So this is in Chitpur, and it just sums up so much of what we've been saying. The handbills and other things that you will see are from the archives of Natya Shodh Sansthan, and some of the books and other things, images are from Bongyo Sahitya Porishad, which at the time when I first went, they would just say, Dharun, here, take this. And I would take it and it would disintegrate, literally, in my hands. And I would say, but, what, you got it, haven't you? Nin, take it, you got it. So that, but still. And then the other photographs, and there's one more photograph and a painting that I'll tell you later. So, yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to, just can you keep this for a minute, the colonial influence in terms of the Xmas pantomime and all of that is the fairy opera, all of it working through in this multi-genre. And I loved the poetry of Sunday at Candlelight.
Yeah.
So, but what, I don't know, do you want to do another reading from, no, I was just thinking that if we are going to move to the new book, which we've just launched or relaunched, your work has just seamlessly flown, literally flowed from the translation and your immersion in Vinodini's life to this larger study of public women in British India. And I've had the opportunity not to read it as closely as I would like to later, but to sort of take out, to delve into certain portions of the book. And I'd like to talk a little bit about, I mean, of course, the center is the women and the public mainstream theater that they were engaged in. But what seemed to me from your pictures, some of the visuals that we are seeing and that we will see, is how much the city is also a performer in your study. That it's almost as if Calcutta, colonial Calcutta of late 19th century into early 20th, is also a protagonist along with the women performers that, and would you like to talk a little bit about
sure.
The role of the city?
One of the things I did when I embarked on this adventurous path and didn't have a job, chose not to have a job, and was very happy. Yes. Living from grant to grant and occasionally no grants, but was to actually try and locate. I worked instinctively against this idea of a Bengali theatre. So I actually received money, applied for money to go and study Sangeet Natak in Pune and look at the archives in Bombay. And very, very self-consciously, because they were the other big regional satrap, if you like, with and Sangeet Natak was very interesting because not just because it had so much Sangeet, sometimes they had even more than 200 songs, but precisely because they had no women. One, and two, I'm coming to the city in a slightly roundabout way, and two, they were extremely professional. Now, one of the problems that I've identified with Vinodini was that it was the slur of being a professional, that you're taking money for what you're doing, and that so when she's playing the saint, the question is, there are two kind of schools. One school would say, oh, she's so religious because she's so impure, so she's naturally extremely seeking redemption, so she makes a great actress. So that was one school. The other one was, oh, these women anyway do everything for money. So they are so good at pretending that, and they're getting money for it. And so that's why she's so good at Chaitanya or doing a Xmas pantomime. So those were the two schools for the women. Whereas Sangeet Natak very clearly did not work with women, and when they came much, much later. Now, Sangeet Natak was never concentrated in Bombay the way theatre was concentrated in Calcutta. So it really opened up in a very oblique way another side of colonial history. And secondly, and that's probably the more interesting thing, they were constantly touring Sangeet Natak. In fact, Kirloskar's company even came to Calcutta. Not many people talk about it, but I found this mentioned in a huge article. So Calcutta was quite unique in its particular brand of colonialism. On the one hand, for having huge amounts of capital flowing through it. On the other hand, never really having a hinterland, where like Bombay. And the sort of mercantile establishment in Bombay, which were also made up of, if one may use the word, non-Marathis, and Nitin can correct me if I'm doing it wrong, but it meant that they were damn proud to make their money and damn proud to set up these. So Parsi theatre, Marathi Sangeet Natak, I mean, money was not a tainted thing. It wasn't the problem. So Calcutta then becomes this, and Calcutta's project with modernity, that's what I've tried to do in the second book, is actually show that it's a completely unfinished, unrealized project. I know I'm going to be slaughtered and hung and quartered by the good Bengalis for saying this, but if you see the connections I'm making between the fact that the women are entering the field so early as professionals, very, very early.
Yes, and other people are resigning. Vidyasagar resigns in protest.
I'd like Brinda to comment on the slide, which I looked at, and not that we were going to comment on the slide, but because we are talking of public women, I was looking at the slide, and I would like to just 4 lines of the song that she sang always in Chaitanya Lila, which actually is reality and metaphor within and without, brought out beautifully, because that's what her life really was about. Yeah, Chaitanya Lila was a play which actually is historic in Bangla theatre for a simple reason that Sri Ramakrishna had gone to the public theatre and had then gone up to the stage and blessed Binodini and said, Chaitanya Hog, which means, may you be enlightened. Now, this, again, as she said, put into 2 schools, means either you become very holy and you repent and you repent doing what you're doing, and since you come from a lowly background, etc. And the other one is, well, they can do it all. They take money for it, so jolly well do it. But I just wanted to talk about the song in a simple way, that Hori mon mojaye lukale kothay. That means Hori, if I look at Hori as the many people in the lives in the life of Binodini, lukale kothay, where did you hide? Ami bhabe eka, I am alone, dao go dekha. Please, show yourself to me. Prano chokha rakho paye. Now this can be extremely spiritual, and then her mentor and people who she called Mahashoy, and people who she was, which you discussed as Ashrita, as sheltered, etc. So I think this brings about a lot in her within and without, which shows that, okay, she's now, she's redeemed herself in public space. So I found it pretty interesting, and I found that cut very interesting, within and without. You title it that, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This photograph was also taken by Shonjita Bhattacharya.
Yeah.
No, in fact, I wanted to ask you about using, why you would choose this very evocative photograph of, and title it, and it's in the postscript of the book.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of, you're coming towards the end of all the study that you have done through all the various chapters, and here we're looking at a very rundown door that is halfway open, and we're getting a sense of a dimly lit room, and then a window beyond that, right? And then the inner courtyard of the house beyond that. So we're getting all these layers, and there's a very obvious metaphor, of course, about going further and further inside. But exactly what Minoti was saying, I was thinking that it's not just it's on the one hand to do with spaces, the domestic and the public, and you've talked already all through the book about the various spaces that the women traverse and cross and recross, and all about thresholds, some that are very obvious and then some that are shadowed, and that she has to occupy. But even more so, to connect with what Minoti was saying, that it seems to me that in your postscript it also plays the role of the mind of the actress, and how she's constantly having to live these various roles and occupy these various spaces all at the same time. So the fact that we can see at least 3 layers of spaces that she would be in and out of. So could you talk a little bit about why you chose this and what it's meant to signify for you?
Well, I think both of you have done a good job, but I'll just add to it. See, the absurdity of girls who probably come from, whose generational occupation it is to be part of an entertainment economy, and who don't have formal schooling, but who are actually making possible the circulation of new masterpieces, whether by Madhusudan or by Girish Chandra or by subsequently even by Tagore, by Rabindranath Tagore. So that extreme irony of, on the one hand, you have this huge Stri Shiksha, women's education, that whole thing. So my reading of all the very good feminist histories and so on that I have done seem to always have these segregated areas. So when you do performance, you don't really do women's education. When you do women's education, you don't do genres, you know, and so on. And I thought this is exactly the space where this just breaks down. Breaks down on the one hand, and on the other hand, where they're the greatest taboos. So, in fact, crossing the threshold is something that's being done practically at every moment. And this literally, if I were to tell you where it is, again, it's a little lane, probably twice as wide as this, I'm not exaggerating, in Chitpur, off Chitpur. So not the big road, but off it. And we were just wandering in and out, and this deserted space was there, but it looked very lived in. You can see household utensils there. And on that hot summer afternoon, I could hear raucous laughter, shrieks. I mean, they were not of terror, they were, I guess, of enjoyment. But it was exactly like what a bad film would show when they wanted you to say, "Acha, now you're in the underbelly." Exactly that kind of thing. So, but juxtaposed with this. So, and then if you remember, Brinda, since you've actually gone through the book in more detail, there's a whole chapter on the city, the underworld of the city, and how it appears in different fictive narratives, and how it actually, the hermeneutics of the city, and how it changes the form itself. So even if it's pulp fiction, or if it's a brilliant story by Rabindranath, the city actually in some ways shapes the form of the narrative. And then it's immediately commodified. So the critique then becomes an object of consumption. So one of these novellas, which was called Obinitri, what was it called? Charms of an Obinitri Roop. Yeah. So the beauty, but the beauty here obviously in an extremely moralistic way as the seductive, ensnaring wiles of the actress. And so then it was made again into, I think, a Christmas play by the guy who wrote it and who himself came from a different class, so he declassed himself. This is Amorendranath Datta. And he had this great affair with one of the actresses, whose daughter I had gone to see many, of course, decades later.
Ask a question?
Yeah. So I don't know if this answers your question.
I think we kind of just still staying on with the within and without. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about, the troubled question of sexuality, which comes up very much. You see, on one hand, you have this very stereotypical, fallen women image or whatever, when Minoti is constantly in a lament and constantly beating herself up in so many places. On the other hand, this entire hankering for the Bhadramohila status, which you've brought out beautifully as part of that literature, which they were aspiring to be the Bhadramohila status, and looking for domesticity, and the amount of Shoti Natoks which came up. So could you just talk a little bit about it? It's a matter of little interest to me to sort of...
Okay, it's extremely...
you did talk of feminism at one point of...
Yeah, but
compartmentalized.
I'm actually not saying that the stuff that was being shown on stage was of a high standard. I'm saying that a lot of it was pulp. A lot of it was extremely conservative, fiercely anti-women. They even had a play called The Wily Woman. It's there in the book, the poster. Stri Buddhi, ha ha ha, Stri Buddhi. So, yeah, I mean, all of it. If you look at the farces, almost 90% of them were anti-women. So it's not as if these women were playing roles which were, you know, it was like they were being constantly put into almost like a whirlpool out of which you couldn't get out, because, and so there were these rare plays, and that's why I've devoted the postscript to one of those plays, which in fact brought about the Dramatic Performances Act, in which the woman was a woman who was educated, who was fairly well off, who wanted to do things, including, and this is one of the earliest nationalist plays, if you look at it, Chatterjee. But who was playing this role? It was this woman, or this girl. Very often they were teenagers. So this extreme anomaly of what was the theatrical fare? It was highly conservative. It was very rarely, not radical, but extremely regressive. So the Brahmo battle with the stage was not just because the stage is a bad place, but the stage is also a highly misogynist. I mean, I'm sure it's like a lot of it like the TV serials today. So they're running, they're commercial, they're selling, they get good TRPs, but are they the sort of thing that you would even remotely say are feminist or radical? So, how are we doing on time? Because we have to
it's 7:45.
Okay, so maybe we should have one last question, and then move on to the next session.
Shall we go to that, the cross-dressing?
Yeah, sure.
The cross-dressing, yeah. Yeah, right.
So on the left is this, just identify them. On the left is this latter day, the two generations. So Binodini Dasi, who's the first generation actress, is on the right, and she's cross-dressed as a Babu in this very radical play called Sarojini. Sarat is the man's name, hyphen Sarojini is the woman's name, which was one of the banned plays, and the guy was put in jail and so on and so forth. And this other woman on the left, we only know her as Rani, and she's playing a role, probably a very typical role of doing the interludes, you know, the song and dance bits, what today has become the item number. This is a very tame, domestic almost version of it. So I thought it would be fun to have Binodini dressed as a Babu looking at her, the next generation actress.
Yeah. No, you have very interesting sections in the book on cross-dressing, which is a term that you've used with a certain amount of trepidation. I think saying that, of course, we need to nuance it more than just say that they were cross-dressing. And some of the things that you have pointed out is how the conflation of genders, you know, women who could act as men, etc. And on the other hand, there's a conflation of actress, prostitute, courtesan, you know, which then speaks to the sexuality question that Minoti was raising. And you have a section in your postscript that's titled "Between Labor and Pleasure," what was this place of work? And I was thinking that in you know, these very interesting visuals that you have of the cross-dressed actresses, what is it that, you know, given that before the 1870s, when the women came on stage, on the mainstream stage, it was men who were cross-dressing as women and acting women's roles, right? And suddenly then there was this change when women come in, and I think you've noted somewhere in the book that then there's no more of the men at all, right, doing this.
Well, one guy tries and it fails. He says,
Right.
let's restore morality and let the men dress as women. He tries, but he doesn't succeed.
So suddenly that, dramatically changes. So what does this mean when women are then taking on the role of men or dressing? I mean, is there, you mentioned burlesque on the one hand, or is it a kind of appropriation of a particular kind, that they're also entering spaces that they could not in other ways? What did it denote?
May I add on to this so that you can complete it? Very, very short, very short. You can bring in the gaze here because, as an audience, and me being in theatre, what would the man then look at when, how would he look at the woman dressed as a man, as an audience? What could the gaze be like? Or what would the gaze of the Bhadra Mohila women when they look at the stage in that manner? Would it be a sense of envy or not? This is one part in the gaze. And the second part is, you yourself have raised this question, is when they were playing these iconic figures.
Yes.
When they were playing, which was completely contrary to the kind of life that they led, then as against, being uneducated and again, quote unquote, fallen and whatever, how would you contend with this entire?
Okay, very synoptically, because I could do another book on this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's look at it as a continuum, like along a scale, rather than a binary or a replacement or a substitute. So I would say, without trying to be garv se kaho, that it's more complex than the Shakespearean boy actor. It's more complex for several reasons. One is, again, coming back to the city, let's not forget, this is a city where there's not just Bangla theatre happening on one day. In fact, I have an advertisement which shows there are like 50 different kinds of things happening, including opera, actual opera from Italy, traveling troupes, huge amounts of traveling theatres coming all the way from Australia, including child actors, Parsi theatre, all on the same day. Okay? And your burlesques, farces, even minstrelsy, of course, where the Bengali Babu is being. So all happening on the same day in different parts of the city.
Yeah.
So, and we have actual evidence that these actresses were constantly exposed to many of these new forms. Now, so if we are just speaking of their subjectivity, we could think of it in a number of ways, that theatre is that space where, in fact, you challenge yourself and you feel proud that you can straddle this range.
Yeah.
One. Two, when you're playing iconic figures, and not just Chaitanya. But Chaitanya is very interesting because he himself cross-dresses. And more than cross-dresses is cross-bhav, if we can say that. So, मैं राधा हूँ या कृष्णा? ये मैं राधा कृष्णा दो ही हूँ. Actually, there are images, Kalighat Pats, of Chaitanya as Radha and Krishna, composite. So that fluidity of bhav, it's not this or that one can actually, by force of one's faith, become this or become. So that process of becoming is where it's very, very distinctive from Elizabethan theatre or even Sangeet Natak and so on. That's one. More interestingly is, at what points in this range of plays and entertainment pieces are they obliged to cross-dress? Again, I could do a whole book on that. Sometimes they do it because in the play, very consciously, a heroine in a social drama, as disguise, takes on the dress of a babu. So that would be very different from these dancing stock scenes. For example, when the first record is made, of the recording industry, of course, who do they go to? They go to these actresses because there's nobody else who really knows how to sing. So Gaisberg, I think he's an American, he wrote these meticulous diaries. So he says, went to record and there were these 12 creatures in horrible dresses doing their stuff. Now, so they kind of created a repertoire where again they would pick up things from English pantomimes. And English pantomime had its own tradition of cross-dressing. So it gets incredibly complicated as to what they're performing, what they're thinking, and what, to come back to your question, what we are seeing finally on stage. And I've again tried to give indications, but I'll just end with one thing which I will not read out. This is an unpublished translation that I'd done of one of Girish Chandra, who was the great dramatist of the era. His essay, it's actually called Women Actresses in Male Roles. And this was written in around 1899. Purush Angshe Nari Obhinetri. It's a long thing. He shows off his learning about Sarah Bernhardt, and he compares her with Binodini playing Chaitanya. He talks about the Jatra, where, remember, it's still a convention that young boys are playing the women. So it's not as if theatre has displaced that convention. It's happening cheek by jowl. So Girish ties himself up into ludicrous knots, I would say, in this particular essay, because he says two things. One, he says, we all know little girls are smarter, better workers than little boys. He actually says that. They are professional in the real sense. You give them a bit of work, they'll do it. So he says it's natural for us to take them to play boys. But when they grow up, they are just too feminine, he says. They just can't get that manliness right. But, he says, when they're doing religious roles and the religious figure has a feminine or androgynous side, then they're pretty good. And then they might even actually have a hit piece. So I'll end with that.
Great.
Shall we? Yeah.
Good.
So we have a little coda, which is with two of my former students who are individuals in their own right, Himangshi Sharma and Kanika Katyal, who both did their MPhil at Delhi University. And in case you wonder what we do in the English department in our MPhil course, we do everything other than real English literature most of the time. And so they are going to share a little bit of their experience, only the good stuff, about having done a course on the short story and translation with me. And I see some others who were also part of that course, and so on. So my book, who works with natural dyes. So she's used indigo on the left, and she's painted, she's done collage, and she's done embroidery. And this she did because I said to her when I was finishing this translation of Bibhuti Bhushan's last novel called Ichamati, which is the name of a river. I'm sorry, the river keeps coming back, and which is about indigo plantations in Bengal, but it's not exactly a historical novel. You have to read it. And I got back in touch with Lavanya, who had been 18 years ago my student in Baroda. And in the meantime, she had blossomed into this wonderful artist. So when I wrote to her, she said, send me the introduction, don't send me the book, and I'll do this for you. So she did this marvelous work, which is with me. And then I requested Rupa to please do the cover, and we had a little skirmish of sorts because Rupa kept saying, oh, we have to cut this out to make it, more visible, and so on and so forth. But finally we agreed. So please.
So my question is based on your translation of Bibhuti Bhushan's Aranyak, and the translation note reads that it's a thrice born text. So, and to anyone who has read the text will be able to see that perhaps there is a multi-layered narrative to the text, which is not just to say that it is a text that is about plants and also about labor relations and also about tribals, but there are all kinds of languages also weaved into the text. So though the text is in Bangla, but it seeks to a readership that is not just Bengali, because there are all kinds of Hindustani speakers that the narrator encounters, and all of that is done beautifully in the text. And I thought you could maybe speak on the thrice born text aspect.
Okay. I did Aranyak as a labor of love, as indeed I had done Vinodini Dasi. Nobody had commissioned it. It was my way of entering Bangla in very different ways. And for Bibhuti Bhushan, Aranyak was a kind of sui generis, you know, it's unique in the sense that he was actually sent to Bhagalpur to look after an estate. So he almost by default, before that, because he really needed money, he was a school teacher, and he also briefly was preaching against cow slaughter. but he used it in a different way. Being a writer, he went to the Arakans, and his diaries are brilliant, and they are now being translated by his grandson. I'm very happy to see. So in Aranyak, here is this Bengali Babu suddenly flung into what he sees as the primitive backwaters, Dehat. And he discovers not just the forest, the spell of the forest, the enchantment of the forest, but he discovers a different idea of human life, of what makes people desire to live and to be happy with. You remember the chapter where when I was translating it, I remember I was saying, my God, I never thought I would be translating pages about a kadhai. This is a god, Muneshwar Singh, and he is lusting after a kadhai. He doesn't have one. And so the narrator's sensibility is shot through with these moments. And so the question of language is not just, that's where I'm coming to, it's not just, is it this dialect? Is it this version of Hindi? What do they speak in Punya? But it's of language itself as being, you know, what we say, for example, when we're teaching a course on Dalit aesthetics and so on, wouldn't really think that it would be there in a novel like this. But it's there. So it is how the materiality of everyday life actually creates a certain language of desire, a language of aspiration, which maybe has no resonance with the Bhadralok Bengali, who's poor, by the way, but he's educated. So that's one. The second and very quick response I have, again, like the theater thing, I wanted to take Bibhuti Bhushan out of that hermetic Bengali classic. And I didn't have to struggle hard, because if you read his life and if you read his diaries, he was, in his literary imagination, in his mind, he was constantly living in the world of European and Western explorers and their kind of discovery of the River Hudson, of Africa, of the Taklamakan Desert. Now, because I wrote about this, so the perils of being a translator, the sorrows, because I wrote about this at the very end, I had some detailed notes on who these explorers were. Why is he talking about them? I was called a radical sheik, whatever that is, but not a complimentary thing, I gathered. Because I think the attack, the critique was that, why are you making this wonderful quintessential Bengali writer why are you sort of showing this side of his as if he was colonized? I'm not saying he was colonized, but he was living in British India. How could he not? And he loved reading about these. So the test for Vibhuti Bhushan and then for me as his translator became, how do you keep these multiple layers of the reading that the author does, the reading that the narrator in the literary text does of these so-called savages who he starts respecting, and of the act of writing then. You know, how do I even write about this? Because he also says this is an act of atonement. I write because it's because of me that those forests are destroyed, because he was the manager, you know. So I don't know if I've answered your question. Yeah.
Just building on what you just talked about here, two things that you mentioned, that language itself as a presence and then informing the materiality of everyday experience in life. And a second thing was how you keep the multiple layers of language. Now, from here, I want to come to two specific questions. The first one being that when you are translating a book, right, a book like, especially texts which are written by someone like Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, and I'm talking about Aranyak, I'm talking about Ichamati, I'm also talking about making a mango whistle. There is always a negotiation with so many linguistic registers within the text. But as a translator, when you are approaching it in today's time, but not today, literally you also approached it way back, and I know your bio tells me, and because of my own engagement with you, has told me that you're also someone who's navigated through a lot of linguistic territories yourself. Even though on the surface it seems like it's a transaction between Bangla and English, but when you were translating portions of the books themselves, you were also living in US, you were also living in a place like Gujarat, Hawaii, and learning Taiwanese and so on and so forth. Then these languages and engagement with these languages is also shaping your own materiality, your own experience, your own reading of these books in the everyday, and then your experience of the everyday as you go around as you go by translating these two books. So I just want to ask that, as a translator then, this is not just one category of linguistic registers that you're dealing with, but there's one which is your own everyday that's coming. So how do you negotiate with these two experiences into translating a book like this, which refuses to belong to a very specific time, and it's through its own internal politics?
I don't know if I have an answer for that, Himangshi, but I realize my English changes, that there is no one English that I have many Englishes. And some of them are very deeply mediated by all the other languages that I move in and out of. Some very actively and some not so actively. And so it really is a kind of shifting axis, that at what point in my life there is a language which takes over. So just to give you an example, not from Vibhuti Bhushan, from Tagore, I was also lambasted for this translation, which was Charadhyay. And this is a very interesting case, and we can end with this because I know we are running out of time, is I began this translation not because I was commissioned to do it or because I thought this was a great novel. In fact, I didn't like the novel to begin with. But I began because Kumar Shahani was doing this film, and he had unhappily for me, asked me to be the project coordinator, which meant I was constantly finding the right color sari, or including a sari which is there when just her body in the water is shown. And I was told, go and get a sari. Of course, it had to be used by afternoon, so I didn't have the whole day. Go and get a sari which has the color of, I'm not joking, Ganga immediately after the rains. This in Calcutta, where shopkeepers refuse to show you things. They said, kichai, it's all there. So anyway, but I did get that sari. I did get that sari. I pride myself on it. And to my horror, this is the first time I was exposed to film thing. Somebody came and with a catchy, they ripped it apart and a fragment of it was over. So, and KK Mahajan was the cameraman. And that level of involvement with color, texture, materiality, I had never in my life been involved in that way. It was a horrible way because I was constantly also looking after things. So I was, Chinese was still fresh in my ears, which it is not so sadly. So I'll just end by reading one. So then I decided to translate the book after the film was over and done, when the battle was lost and won, and when I had recovered. And this is just the third, this was Tagore's last novel and novella. And he was, much to my pleasure, he was much, what is the correct word? Not feted. What is the opposite of that? Bombarded. Because of, not bombarded, even stronger. Can someone supply me with that word? Maligned, yes, maligned, thank you. He was maligned, and he was maligned by both. He was maligned by the British state, which said, you know, you're a secret terrorist. And the terrorists said, Kobi Guru, how can you do this to us? You're betraying us. So it's that sort of a thing. So this is an amazing moment in the text and in the film. It becomes like a leitmotif. It's a story of greens, this text. And I think perhaps that's why you wanted to shoot it during the monsoons, or I mean just post-monsoon. So this is that passage which I said, you know, is this me who's translating it? Is this some classical Chinese poet who has appeared to help me? Is it, and then actually having the experience, those days they let you see his real khata, his notebook, Kobi Robi's. Now you see the digitized thing. So, and Professor Sabyasachi Bhattacharya was the VC then, so, you know, we had access to that. It was amazing. Nestling, jostling foliage of pale green and dark, yellow-green and brown-green vegetation in entangled embrace. The sludge of rotting bamboo leaves rising in layers to a pond's surface, and twisting past the pond, a lane which cartwheels have scarred deep. This was one sentence in Tagore, and I wanted to keep it so. Overrun with thorny scrub and bulbous tubers of old kochu, getu, and mansa, so I took a decision here to keep those. And occasionally a straggling fence of ashara, so all kinds of straggling clumps. Through the gaps, a sudden glimpse of water standing in the fields of young paddy cut across by demarcating strips of embankments. The lane ends at the steps of a ghat on the Ganga. Built of small bricks from an earlier age, the cracked ruins of the ghat lists to one side, for the Ganga has silted and moved some distance away. A little further away from the ghat, in the accursed shadow of an ancient ruined home in the jungle, the ghost of one who had committed matricide some century and a half ago has taken refuge. I'm skipping a bit. A little further away by the river, a temple in ruins, the fragments of a performance space. And the remaining signs of an ancient wall crumbled. In the darkness where a banyan tree has gathered into itself its descending roots, a broken boat bears its ribs. This is a huge, long paragraph, and I've skipped quite a bit. And you can see it's poetry. It's not prose. And so the Chinese poets, the classical Chinese poets came to my rescue, but I'm still very unhappy with this. And let's end on that note, that given a chance, I would like to redo it. So, thank you. By somebody who's now no more, a childhood friend's husband, Deepak Patwari, and you can guess, it's of the Brahmaputra, my river.
That is only because of a galaxy of new pluralities, with new kinds of places, new kinds of identities gradually coming to prominence. It's because of people like her and a few others, Gayatri Spivak, Sherry Simon, Susan Bassett, Tapan Basu. I mean, we have Tapan Basu around. That the meaning of translation has changed. Now, translation is almost like performing a text. And what are translators? Translators are the people, are the intellectuals who foreground the text for you, I mean, who transplant the text for you, and they are the people who have the agency to destabilize the way you've been reading a text. There were so many examples when Brinda and Minoti and all these people, young students also, when they were asking questions and so many things were, I mean, you must have discovered, I'm talking to my younger teams because all others know about it. Like, they are the people who have introduced us to the notion of multiple mothering. Anand and Rashmi and all of you, you belong to my team, and Kalyani, and all the younger people. I mean, you must have seen that they are the people who made us see that the author is not the single mother. Beyond the author, there are multiple mothers to a text. How she was foreground, what kind of prefaces and footnotes she was offering. You must make a note of, because going to learn from this experience. And in India, the notion of multiple mothering is not very, I mean, we all know that there are so many Yashodas to a text. Affectionate, they're all affectionate Yashodas. I mean, the way they rear up the text, the way they ponder. Last sentence that she said, she's not very happy with the translation. She wants to give it this whole idea of recasting, revisiting. I mean, it's such a deep involvement that you must learn from people like her. These are exemplary figure, and I want you to learn from them. Now, about a little backdrop, when they were talking, for my Hindi readers, Hindi and Delhi-based readers, I want just a little backdrop I want to offer. Like you all know, that as the epicenter of Indian Renaissance, Calcutta has been the seat of many levels of civilizational dialogues. And even when two people talk, even in an interpersonal dialogue, so many aporias prop up, so many impasses prop up. Imagine a situation where two civilizations are chatting, two or three kinds. And they're chatting like, fighting, doing all kinds of things. Now, naturally, in a situation like this, so many aporias will keep propping. You remember that nursery rhyme? Like chick, here a chicken, there a chicken, chick everywhere. Old MacDonald had a farm. So almost like the chicks in the old MacDonald's farm, there are so many impasses, so many disjunctions cropping up. And the credit of translators and commentators like Rimli lies in the fact that they deconstruct these aporias with an insight into the heart of the matter. As a researcher, this is also a learning experience for you. I mean, when you grow up, you have to bear this in mind, the way they research. I mean, meeting people, when I read the book over, I had only 2 days, but I couldn't stop reading. And I could see that as a researcher, into the theatrical performance history, she's visited so many people. And she's gone to all these pieces almost imploring. And then what has she done? she has mastered the art of weaving multiple narratives around the impasse. Isn't it? It's very difficult to approach things from all the perspectives. I mean, these are, you must have gathered by now that she is talking about nutties. Nutties are the, actresses in the 19th century, who were called Baranganas. In Hindi we call it Varanganas. Almost like, I don't have to explain. Varanganas are Varanganas. Now, this girl, Professor Rimli Bhattacharya calls them the first batch of working women. I mean, I really like the idea. And the way she has portrayed their admirers, their patrons, their sponsors, their directors, their killers, and all those people, who had bad things to say about them, the way she has put it across through a very intelligent deconstruction of the speeches that these people made, nutties. I just wish, Rimli, that someday you translate those speeches for us. This is something that you must have done. I really missed that. Of course you summarize the speeches for us. But the way, they do because they wanted to say good things about their guru and they were denied an entry into the hall. They made speeches, those people. They were trained actresses, they knew how to put things across, but they were talking sense. When you, whatever she has offered in summary, you must read. Go and buy the book and read it. So, and she has delineated those characters, how things were put up in addas, how they were discussed in drawing rooms, how they were discussed here and there and in journals. She's really given and it's such a lucid, such an interesting depiction that one feels tempted to write a novel around that. You remember Anandvardhan called such texts, what did it call it? He called them Anya Yoni texts, the texts that give birth to, that generate other kinds of texts. They are Anya Yoni texts, like they are Sadanira texts. We were talking about rivers, and it's a Sadanira text that can give vent to many rivulets. Many a rivulet, many an auxiliary text. And these are, when I think about Bhavabhutis, I'd conclude and I'll ask you to, ask her a few questions. Before I conclude, I was just wondering when I was listening to her, whether Rabindranath Tagore, all these people, even Nati Minoti, what would they be thinking? They must be thinking along the line of Bhavabhuti. You remember that famous shloka? Utpatsate mamatu kopi samana dharma kalo hi niravati vipulacha prithvi. Someday, at some point of time, some person will be born to interpret me in the right spirit. Someday. Wow. Because porous are the boundaries of time and space. This is how this is a rough translation, of course, but this is more to it. So now that you're all, I think, you must be so full of questions, and, so please, whoever wants to come to the stage, please ask a question. Rimli ji, please come here and stay. And Brinda and Minoti, you were wonderful. Such intriguing questions. Of course, brilliant academics like you would definitely, and even these two little girls. Marvelous.
Please join.
And I just went out, rushed out, and got a copy. So I was going through a few things. And so there are two things here. One which I immensely appreciate, and one which I think I would like to find fault with. Which one do you think, ma'am, I should start with?
The one that's the fault.
Okay. Yeah. We'll take the appreciation out for 2 minutes. Okay. Rimli ma'am, yours, Minoti ma'am's and Brinda ma'am's discussion, and I think if I am right, because I missed reading the book too, you're referring to the plays, and you criticized, if not castigated, so you criticized the qualities of the plays as quote-unquote pulp, and you said that most plays were quote-unquote bad quality. My issue is with that. I would rather feel in a social situation where, you know, for example, today people call Premchand, you know, a casteist author for, you know, write one of his stories. The point is, even that pulp is creating a space for itself with the women at least able to, you know. That was my point.
That's a very fair question, and I will admit to having made a very sweeping statement. So I take back some of my, the sweep of the sweeping statement, a little bit. But the statement still remains. And I'll tell you why. Because it was in response to a question. The question was, in what ways did these plays actually impact on and seep into these women's sense of selves, their sense of being performers, and so on. So my saying that they were all pulp is, of course, completely wrong. They weren't all pulp, but they were largely, I would still say, if not pulp, even when they were written with great care and love, like the social dramas. Okay, let's take a play by Girish Chandra Ghosh, which was called Balidan. I don't need to translate it. And it became a hit, although it was like a very, very dark play. And the Balidan was about daughters being sacrificed at the altar of marriage to worthless young men who more or less beat them up and so on. Yeah, and it's presented in the violence is presented on stage. So, you know, Girish was certainly not mincing words. So it's a great play. But in what lies the hope? In what way is the play moving? The play moves entirely towards not just the idea of the sati unto death, that is, my husband, you can kick me, you can beat me up, you can do what you like, but you are my Lord. वो तो है ही. उसके अलावा what Girish did, and that was a master stroke because they did a replay of this about 20 years ago, and I saw it done by a brilliant actress. They made the girl, the Jobi, who's kind of the real victim, seek solace in Krishna, Madhusudan. And so she becomes this half-mad figure. So that's something I've noted down, that why is it that the solution and the sort of the actual social problem which is being depicted with such horror, such ugliness is being actually depicted, why is it always inevitably ending with, you know, thou art my Lord till the last kick, or that Krishna is going to help me? And what did it mean for the actress then to be doing these roles? So actually I have that chapter called Confessional Voices, where the male writers of pulp are taking on the voice of the actress and writing these first-person narratives, stories, very titillating. So that's the other problem, that the problem also becomes again commodified and eroticized in the worst possible way. So that's what I meant. So I take back my sweep, but I don't take back the statement. Now for the good part.
The good part I thought was absolutely brilliant. I would like to read this out. This is the Routledge book, page 87, and this is the last sentence. Until we allow interpenetrative histories to tell their tale, comma, there is a danger of being trapped in discrete realms of race, ethnicity, region, and any other real or perceived marker of difference. Thank you very much.
Yeah, they have small gifts, token of appreciation.
That's why I was calling. Please, ma'am, please join us. Okay, we have another question. Pankuri Sinha will ask a question, please. Yeah. Be a bit loud and
recorded. So you better go there.
I will.
I think Rimli ma'am mentioned the fact, the theory or the concept of, the nation not being completely colonized by the British when you were talking about Vibhuti Bhushan's book Aranyak and Ichamati both, and his own readings and his fascination with their lives. And I think that this is a concept that has been taken up in many, many history books. Particularly one comes to my mind, which is, The Nation and Its Fragments. I think it's by Partha Chatterjee, if I'm correct. And I think he's also done a case study on Binodini, the actress. And he has talked at length about, he's actually depicted her as somebody who was in the same vein as you have done, pretty much, somebody who was symbolic of this uncolonized core of the nation to an extent, because she was a professional and because she was so steeped into the Indian culture and so on and so forth. But then he talks about, you mentioned the women being subjugated in so many ways despite being feminist from within. But he talks about a love affair that was totally devastating. So I'm sorry if I'm, making it a little light, but that's not the intention. Yeah. So I kind of just wanted to, because the question is, if you can tell us a little bit more about her life, her personal life.
No, you'll have to read the book, which is out of print.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
But I'll just first clarify that I think Partha Chatterjee and I are on slightly different tracks.
Okay.
Because one of his major contributions, which I have acknowledged and also skirmished against, is precisely this idea that there is a interior domestic space that was pure, and that the Hindu, that inner sanctum, and that there was a space which was and therefore this extreme reaction. So that has been his predominant reading, not my reading, which, if we go back to that extremely evocative image photographed by Shonchita, which both Brinda and Minoti alluded to, I think that photograph is worth reflecting on. Not just because of its black and white scales and its tonalities, but precisely you see the actress is, the Bengali theatre actress is exactly the what is the idiom of, it destroys the neat arguments that we love to construct. Because at every moment there is a but, there is this. So even when Anamika, to allude to that very important chapter where they denied admittance to the town hall, and they say, okay, well, you can speak at the theatres, at Star Theatre, you can speak about your guru. They speak about their guru, but they're really speaking about themselves. But what is the trope that they use? They use the Vaishnav trope of interiority, on the one hand, but every single thing they're saying is exactly what a modern working woman would say, which is, I learned my trade in this way, this is how much I got paid for it, this is the kind of appreciation I got for it, this is where I needed more training. It's not the language of Vaishnav interiority. But what is amazing is that there can be a meld of a certain strand, a certain dhara of Vaishnav interiority, alongside a certain claiming of rights. So they use Eklavya. So finally it's not the guru, it's Eklavya we remember. So there's a reversal of these tropes. Great. So that's where I think Partha Chatterjee and I are on completely different tracks. I mean, that's my reading.
Okay.
But you're right that he does also talk about Binodini.
The entire book is woven around.
Yeah,
concept.
but I think the way I talk about Binodini is not either to say that she's this emancipated feminist, not at all. That's why I had those lines, I am a polluted creature, but she's an author. She's an author. And her book goes into reprint. So it's those complexities and contradictions, I think, that I love, and I think that's my raison d'être, to want to delve into those contradictions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It is my proud privilege today to offer the formal vote of thanks. I wish to begin by thanking Dr. Anamika for revealing the essence of the discussion today and offering crucial insights. I would like to thank Professor Rimli Bhattacharya for this fascinating study of public women in British India in her inimitable, conversational, and utterly modest style. I was transported for a moment to my master's days at the arts faculty listening to you, and I loved it. I'd like to thank the two interlocutors, Dr. Minoti Chatterjee for her incisive and illuminating comments, and Dr. Brinda Bose for steering the conversation to several significant points regarding the changing face of the city of Calcutta. I would like to thank the august audience for being...
Please thank him.
Yeah, they'll be there. I'd like to thank the august audience for being an engaged and attentive audience. I'd like to thank Himanshi and Kanika for supplementing the talk and the discussion with their presentation, their questions and things. I'd like to thank IHC for providing us this immaculate platform to come together and discuss the finer nuances of translation. This lecture, the fifth in the series, has been thought-provoking and enriching in its own sense, and is a fitting conclusion to the journey which started in 2018 with speakers like Professor Alok Bhalla, Professor Nishad Zaidi, Babli Moitra Saraf, Rakshanda Jalir, Arunava Sinha, Sukrita Paul Kumar, Professor Mala Lal, and the three eminent personalities who have joined us today here. So I would request the audience to offer a huge round of applause for them. As a part of our series, we actually have the practice of offering tokens of gratitude. We have welcomed them before. So we have bouquets, which I would request Rashmi Bhardwaj to hand over to Professor Rimli Bhattacharya first. Rashmi. To Dr. Minoti Chatterjee next. And to Dr. Brinda Bose. Now I would like to request Anand Khatri of Poiesis Society to give out the tokens of appreciation. So we have the cups with Professor Rimli Bhattacharya on it. So that's her cup. Yes. And this is Minoti ma'am.
Oh, horrible.
No. And this is Dr. Brinda Bose. Thank you so much for joining us here. We hope to be back next year with an interesting talk again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for having us here. Thank you so much.